Let's talk about how to create pivot tables in Excel. I happen to be using Excel 2016, although it looks the same in older versions of Excel. Now, what is a pivot table? I have, in this particular instance, 900 records, or a little more than if I hit Control and the down arrow, 979 records of baseball-related data. So I hit the Control key and the up arrow. So I have people's names, their position, whether they bat left, right-handed, or can bat both, whether they throw left or right-handed, their height, weight, team they are playing on, and their age. A pivot table allows me to summarize this data in a multitude of ways, and I can easily pivot the data between rows and columns, and the values that I'm analyzing I can quickly change from. I could take an average of their height or an average of their age, the sum of their weight, whatever I want to look at. So for instance, real quickly with the pivot table, I could ask, what is the average weight of the first baseman? How many left-handed throwers are there per team? Who is the youngest team? Who is the oldest team? With 979 records, and yet with the pivot table, I can easily answer any and all of those questions. To create a pivot table, I simply click anywhere in the data, and under the Insert ribbon, under Tables Group, I have Pivot Table. So you click on that, and normally Excel can guess the range of the data as long as you don't have any anomalies in it. You definitely don't want to have any blank rows or blank columns in your data. So right now it's saying, well, here's what I think your range is, and you're like, yep, that looks good to me. I'm doing a new worksheet, and that's it. I can now go ahead and hit OK, and it moves me over to a new sheet, and I have two different areas. I have my pivot table fields pane over here on the right, and we're actually going to be creating the pivot table report. Will show up over here on the left. Taking a look at the pivot table fields area on the right here, notice right here I have all of the fields that were available in our original data, the name, position, bats, that's the left or right, do they throw left or right, height, weight, team, and age. Down here are where I can place those fields, and then they'll show up over here in the pivot table report. So in other words, let's go ahead and answer our first question over here, which was, what is the average weight of the first baseman? I'm going to want position down here on the rows. So I'm going to click on that and drag it down to rows. Over in our report area, you'll see all of the various positions. And now in this values area is where you're going to typically put your numerical data. Once in a while we can put some textual data down here in order to do a count, but normally the values is the things that I want to summarize. So in this case, I think it was the average weight. I will put down under values, and it defaults to sum. It's going to sum the weight of all of the different players in these positions. I want to change that to average, and there's a couple ways to do that. Notice when I put the weight down here, there's a little drop down arrow which brings up value field settings. When I click on that, rather than sum, I can hit this word average, and now it'll give me an average of their weight. The other place I could have done that is here. We have now a new pivot table, a couple pivot table ribbons, Analyze and Design. Here is that same field settings where I clicked on average. The other thing I can do in that same box is change the number format. So I'll hit number format, and I'll change this to 2 decimal places instead of all that it's showing. Hit OK, and now there's the average weight by position. So now let's say I want to add into this pivot table the same information, average weight by position, but I want to do that for each team. So I'm going to grab the team here, and I can put that in the columns. Now it's going to be problematic because there's so many teams, it's going to go way across, in which case I'll demonstrate how I can switch the row and the columns. So, but just to start out, I'm going to grab the teams and put it in the column area. And now we have the average weight by position by team. Now, like I mentioned, there's a lot of teams, and so it goes very far across our spreadsheet. There's not so many positions, and so it might be better to put the positions in the columns and the team in the rows. And so I'm going to grab the team and drag it down to rows. Okay, and by the way, I can, now what I'll see is that here's the first baseman and all the teams, and I can collapse that. Here's the second baseman and all the teams. Watch this. I'll take the teams down here in the field pane area, and I'll move it above. So now I have the team and all their positions. Both of them are in the rows area. And I can move one on top of the other, and it impacts how it looks over here in the report side. So now I have each team, their positions, and the average weight. If I want, I can drag the position up to columns again, and now that's what it looks like. I have all of the teams down the rows and all of the positions across the columns. When I teach pivot tables in my classroom, I tell students they have to be willing to experiment and drag things around in here and see the impact it has on the report. Another change I want to make to this is not only do I want to see their average weight, maybe I want to see the average height in addition to weight. So now I can grab the height and drag it down to values. Okay, now again, it's doing the sum of the height. So I'm going to change that. This time I'm going up to this, the Analyze ribbon, Field Settings. And, wait, I got to make sure I'm on the right field. So here we go, Average Weight, Field Settings. Oh, that was the wrong field. I want to do the height, Field Settings, and take an average, hit OK. Now I have my average height for all of the players in those positions for those teams. I want to change the format to be, maybe we'll just do 1 decimal place. So again, Field Settings, Number Format. Hit this, go to 1, OK, OK, and it changes it to 1 decimal place for everybody. Now, this isn't my favorite look because for this team, A and A, I got a first baseman and a second baseman, and underneath that, the average weight, the average height. Notice over here under columns, when I grab 2 numeric things that I'm going to summarize in the values section, the pivot table automatically puts this sigma values up here in the columns. I can drag that over to rows. And now look what that does. In the rows side, I'll see my team, and then I'll have average weight, average height, and then by position. For me, that's a little bit easier to read. The chart or the pivot table doesn't go so far across the spreadsheet. And again, this only happens because I happen to have put 2 different calculations in the values area. And when you do that, it tends to start out putting the labels for those values in the columns. And very often it's easier to read if you just drag that down to the rows. Now we have one more box down here in the field pane area, and that's called filters. Now what that's going to do is allow us to filter the data based on whatever field we put in here. And so in this example, what I think I'm going to do is I want to filter on team. I don't want to see all the teams all the time. Maybe I just want to look at 1 team at a time. So I'm going to take team from this rows area, drag it up to filters. Then I'm going to take my positions and move those down to the rows above values. All right, so now I can see the average weight and average height for the first baseman for all the teams. If I want a particular team on the filter, I can click on it and then just choose the first team. So now I have the average weight and height for the first baseman on that particular team. I assume that's probably Anaheim. I can choose Boston, hit OK, and now I have the average height and weight of the first baseman on the Boston team. And so filters allows me to filter the data to 1 team at a time. If you should want multiple teams, I can click on this, and now I can do Boston, and we'll try Baltimore, hit OK. And it'll say here that I have multiple items, but again, weight, height, first baseman for those 2 teams. Again, as new users of pivot tables, don't be shy about moving things around in these 4 boxes and see the effect you get. Now, obviously, the values area, you're typically going to put in your numeric things that we want to take an average, sum. And by the way, there's others. We've been playing with average. It defaults to sum, but I could find the max weight, the max height, the min height. There's other values, right, or other items in this, how to summarize the data in this box right here. So let's do a couple more examples before we end this video, and let's ask or try to answer this last question, and then we'll jump up to the middle one here. Who has the youngest or the oldest team? So to clear out a pivot table, all I have to do is just uncheck these boxes, and it removes all of those fields from my area to right here in the bottom right. And now I want to know the average age by team. So all I have to do is put the age right here, and then of course I can put the team in the row section. Now it looks like I still have a filter turned on. So notice this filter area. I didn't realize this was going to happen when I turned off all of those fields. It kept that filter on. So at this point I can hit select all, and now I have all of my teams. And then also notice I have sum of age. Well, of course I don't want the sum of the age. So I will go to the Analyze Field Settings, and let's change this to the average. And while I'm in field settings, I should just do this right away. Let's change the number to 1 decimal, hit OK. If I want to sort this data, I can sort it just like any other data. I can click in amongst the averages of the age, go to the data ribbon and hit A to Z. And so there it'll sort where I have the youngest team towards the top and the oldest team towards the bottom. Now let's go back and answer that last question. How many left-hand throwers are there per team? Okay, now what we're going to do here is have to count. So for instance, let me just filter this data right here. So let me just grab one team. We'll grab the top one. Okay, and what I want to do is left-hand throwers, I want to be able to count. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm not summing or taking an average or the max or the min. I want to count how many people there are per team. So over here in the pivot table, in the field settings is we have a choice for count. So let's start over and let's grab our team and put that in the rows again. I'm going to grab the throws and put that in the columns. So I have my left-hand throwers and my right-hand throwers. Okay, so that's in my columns. Well, what do you put in the values section? To be quite honest, you could put anything in there. I could even put the height or the weight, because what we're going to do is count. Every time I see an L over here, it's going to count that field. Okay, what I recommend to people is if you want to do a count, throw a text field in the values area, because it will default to count at that point because it can't do anything else. And so for instance, I could go ahead and grab this throws right here, and even though it's in columns, I could also put it in values, and notice it defaults to count, because what else can it do to a piece of text, right? The fact that this is an L or an R, the only thing it can do is count it. And so that's what it does. So let's run back to sheet 3, and notice I have 4 left-hand throwers for the Anaheim team. And another cool thing about pivot tables, if I want to drill down in this data, I can double click on any one of these and it will actually create a new sheet with the records that were used to calculate that value. So I'm going to double click, and notice I have a new sheet. It's called sheet 4, and it's bringing back the players for this team who have throws left. So those are the 4 L's that made up that count. So that gives you a start on creating pivot tables, and I'll emphasize again, be willing to move fields around in this bottom right hand area in the pivot table field pane, and you can watch the impact. Recognize that in the value area you typically need to put in numeric fields. The one time that you don't is if you want to do a count of something. And I should also mention right here, I can click on any one of these cells, and if I wanted to say left-hand throwers or add a different title, I can do that right there, and then adjust that. I could change this to right-hand throwers, change the word row labels so that it says teams. In the next video, we'll talk about how to insert slicer, mess around with the design, the look of our pivot table reports. We can also talk about how to add calculated fields, and then we'll do a quick example of a pivot chart.